Hey guys, welcome to another video. This is continuing with my Azure quest, and today I have something for the guys who are working with containerized or microservice kind of architectures. There's a buzzword out there, KEDA, Kubernetes services, blah 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 blah, right? So I will be talking about Azure Container Apps and what they do in relation to Kubernetes service, right? So Azure Container Apps is effectively a service that Azure is now selling, which is built on top of the Kubernetes service, right? So it allows you to run containerized applications on a serverless platform. But what it then does is it obfuscates all the orchestration configurations that you typically do in Kubernetes. So Microsoft or Azure handles that for you, right? There's a bunch of use cases for microservices where you run applications, let's say in a space where it's event driven, where you're running microservices. You can deploy even APIs to container apps essentially, right? Container apps in Azure can scale on multiple factors, right? So your KEDA-supported scalers. So in the space of Azure, you're talking maybe about your service bus kind of scalers. You're talking about your message queues kind of scalers essentially. So things like HTTP traffic, things like your CPU and memory usage as well can drive the auto scaling in Azure Container Apps essentially. So that's typically what happens in Azure Container Apps, right? Azure Container Apps have two components, and I would like to explain this thing properly. They have container environments and they have container apps, right? So I'm going to explain the two and what it means. A container environment houses a container app, right? So the container environment sets a boundary essentially for all the container apps that it will contain internally, right? So it basically says, cool, all the container apps that I have in me as a container environment share the same network resource and they share the same log analytic workspace, right? So there are multiple cases where you might want to use different container environments or cases where you want to use the same container environment. So in cases where you need to use the same container environment, is typically where the services are related. So if the services are doing cross communication a lot, you typically want them to share the same network, so you typically then place them in the same container environment. I mean, you can do a bunch of other stuff, but if the virtual network is shared, ideally you put them in the same container environment, right? If you are going to use a distributed application runtime, DApp, you would typically want those things to be in the same container environment because they need to cross-communicate across the DApp configuration that you'll be having in that particular space. If you put them in different container environments, you will have communication issues. Hence, you want them to be in the same space so that they can share the same DApp configuration. If you want them to also use the same Log Analytics Workspace, you typically place them in there because as soon as they stay in the same container environment, then they will use the same Log Analytic Workspace. Cases where you don't want to use the same container environment is if you don't want to share compute resources across your container apps essentially, or cases where there's no DApp invocation between the two services in particular. So you then use different environments, but ideally it's based on a use case essentially, right? And you know the benefits of microservices: independent scaling, service delivery. Azure Container Apps actually has DApp integration automatically built in it, so you don't actually need to deploy DApp yourself. It's already enabled, or you just need to enable it essentially when you deploy it. So the key of this video essentially is to actually demo how this whole magic happens, or how you create all of this container apps, container environments, and container apps essentially in Azure. I'll be using the CLI, and then later on I'll just jump onto the Azure Portal just to show you guys how the whole thing is actually orchestrated, right? So at the moment I'll just jump into the demo portion. Oh, okay, cool. Something to pay into consideration is that Container apps use something called revisions to keep history, right? So if you do multiple deployments, if you want to do, let's say, green-blue deployments kind of stuff, you want to roll back, you have an immutable revision basically of a particular instance in time of the particular uh, container app, right? If you do updates to, let's say, for example, your secrets or your config, that does not, this is a curveball, take note of it. The changes don't take effect immediately. You actually need to either restart or do a deploy of a new version so that you create a new revision that will use the new secret essentially. So restart or create another version that will use the new secrets effectively. Then from security perspective, authentication, authorization, container apps come pre-built with federated authentication or integration with federated providers. So you could use, let's say, Microsoft Identity as one of them. You can use Facebook, Twitter, Google, GitHub, and a bunch more others that support Open ID as a thing, as an authentication mechanism. So cool, I'm not going to dig deep into depth. So the distributed application runtime, I'm not going to go deep into that. But then effectively, it enables you to, it enables your microservices to communicate in a pub/sub kind of method or through HTTP calls across the services. But without further ado, what I'd like to do is actually just jump into what needs to happen, and this is effectively now going into showing you guys the cool stuff, the demos, the clicks across the board and all of that. So first things first, what you actually need to do is on your Azure CLI, you actually want to add an extension called Container App, and then that's what will effectively help you with doing the magic. So here I have a typo, I'll just fix it quickly. Then once I've installed that, then the other thing is I actually want to register providers on my subscription. So just to demo that, I'll just quickly go to my subscription. If you click on your subscription and you click on resource providers, you'll see a bunch of other registered providers. It will show you registered, not registered, but there's two that I need to actually make sure that they are registered. For me, they are already registered, but I'll just demo how to do it, right? The first one that we need to do is we need to register the Microsoft app one, right? Why do we register Microsoft app? If you remember, or if you've used container apps before, they were in Microsoft.web namespace, but that has changed since the resources for container apps have now moved or been moved into the Microsoft.app namespace, right? Then the other provider that we need to register is Operational Insights. This guy here is responsible for our log analytics kind of spaces and all of those kind of fun stuff that I mentioned earlier on. Cool. Now that we have those registered, first things first, when we are in Azure, we actually want to work with something called resource groups. So that's my command to actually create a resource group, and the name of my resource group will be Container RG. Then the location will be West Europe. You can choose any of the other locations that Azure uses closer to you essentially. So I just like using West Europe at a particular moment. So we are creating a resource group. We now have the resource group created in our subscription, which is awesome, all well and good. Now we are getting into the cracks, right? This is where the fun stuff starts, or this is where our assignment actually starts, creating a container app in Azure. So now, as I mentioned, there's two components involved. You have something called a container environment. The container environment effectively sets a boundary in terms of call, what networking are we going to use and what log analytic workspace are we going to use for our container apps. So remember, a container environment can have multiple container apps in it. So cool. If you look at the command says AZ container app environment, pay note environment, then we say create the environment, and this is the name of my environment. And I'm creating that container app environment in my Container RG resource group. So if you look at the command while it's still running, it says cool. We realize that you don't have any Log Analytics Workspace. Therefore, it generates a Log Analytics Workspace. This is where all my logs will be pushed in my container apps, essentially. So that is all well and good. While that's running in the background, the other command that I need to actually share with you guys is a little bit more detailed. This is now creating the container app inside the container environment, right? So I'm just going to show you guys the command just on my notepad, just so you guys can see the different components or parameters that are required that I'm passing in. Cool. So if you look at it here, instead of AZ web app inf, we actually just saying AZ web app container app, create. Then I'm giving it a name, and the name is called my container app. And here I'm specifying the resource group. I'm saying the resource group is called container RG. Then subsequently, I'm specifying the environment. This environment is actually this guy that we're creating here. It's the container app environment. So that's what I'm specifying there. And here we are specifying the image. So if you are in Docker kind of spaces, you know there's Docker images. If you've worked with Kubernetes or whatever in Azure, you'll remember that Azure has a container registry where you then publish your images. So here I'm just pulling one of the Microsoft Docs Hello World, essentially, app into my space. And then here, target port, I'm basically saying which port should it use for network, and I'm saying cool, use port 80. Then here I'm saying ingress, what sort of communication does it have? Is it internal or is it external, right? Internal is basically all application within the container app can then communicate with that service, so it's not public exposed on the net. Then if I say external, that means I can access this thing using a URL, right? Here I'm just saying cool, once you've created my container app, just give me this property value back, right? I want to get that ingress FQDN that will basically give me the URL or the name of my particular resource. And actually this command will then actually pop up an HTTP link that we can easily use. So I will use that at the particular point. But now let's go back to our command. And when we come back, we can see that our container environment has been created. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slap this command to create my container app, right? And if I just copy and paste it here, this is now creating my container app. If I look at that, and I just want to make a small adjustment to my command, I'm just changing that ingress setting. I'm saying external, just quotation for the command line that I'm using to basically understand it. But if you just go back to it, just a recap, we specify the name, we specify the resource group, we specify the container app environment, we specify the image we want to deploy to that container app, target port, ingress, and that's query part. It's optional, right? Cool. It says cool, the behavior of this, blah blah blah. Can ignore that for now. Running a command, creating a resource for me. And I need to show you guys what this looks like on Azure, right? Cool, that's my URL. I'm just going to copy that. And this should effectively give us our new container app running. So this is us accessing it for the first time, and it's running on Azure. Obviously, if you try to access this URL, I would have deleted it by that time. But if I go back to my subscription again and I go to, if you look at, okay, cool, these are the providers that we were registering, Operational Insights and Azure App. Those were the providers register stuff is that we ran initially. If I go to resource groups, this is the container RG that we've been creating on the command line. And if I go into here, you can see that it created a Log Analytics Workspace. it created a container apps environment, it created a container app, right? So I'm just gonna click into the container environment. If I go to container environment, I can go to logging options. In logging options, I expect to basically see my Log Analytics Workspace that was linked. So if you remember, it said you didn't have one, I'm going to create one, and it actually linked it to that particular environment. Cool. If I go, that's Debra component, as I mentioned, this thing is pre-built into Azure Container Apps environments. You just add it and configure it as and when you require it. You don't need to deploy it separately. Then if I go back to overview, I'm just gonna go to my container apps. Remember, I created my container app just now, the one that we've accessed here. So if I click here, it's going to basically show me my container app. And if I look at it, that's basically still in the resource group and the workload profile there. So if I look at that, I can see that, okay, cool, this is my container app with that particular thing. And it's basically in a running state, I'm assuming. Let me see if it has one. Doesn't show me that on this overview, but this is the URL again. I can still access it from there if I wanted to. And yep, that's just about it. And what else can I show here? Okay, revisions, that's what I was talking about. When you deploy, you will create a revision of this particular guy. So this is what it looks like. So here I am going to try cheat, and I hope the demo gods are with me. I haven't done this before, but then I am going to try to do an update so that we can try see if there's any revisions that we can create. All right. Cool. While that's doing that, so to do that, I'm going to use AZ update, and I'm going to specify the name of my container app. Then I'm going to specify my resource group and the new image. And on the new image, I actually want to use this guy. So this is from Docker Hub. I hope it will be able to understand what I'm trying to do here. So I'm gonna say that, let's try that and see what happens. Okay, let's see, I hope it finds it. And there's a bunch more other stuff that you can do with the update. So if I go to the update one, you can do something like in var, then you can set up environment variables, you can set up secrets with something like that, and that's pretty much how it works. So now our container app has been updated. I just want to see if this version has been bumped. Yep, you can see that the revision history has been bumped. If I go to revisions, I can so that's, you can see that it's currently activating my new what do you call it? It's currently activating my new revision, and this is the old revision. If I go inactive, nothing. And let's see, just refreshing to see what Azure is doing. Let's cancel that guy. It's still saying activating. I was hoping that my app will change instantly. But yeah, effectively that's what it is. Then with the revisions, you can then say, cool, I want to run this one or not run this one. So you see this one is running and this one is activating. Let me see. So there's a revision URL. Let me try do that. Maybe I can access my revision URL on that. That image, I haven't looked at it myself as well, but I'm assuming that it's working and it should as intended. Let's see. Okay, cool. But the main thing that I was demoing here was revision history and the fact that you can now create new revisions, go back within different revisions essentially. So thank you very much for tuning in, If you have any questions, concerns, comments, please drop them below. Let me know. I am not too exposed to Kubernetes, so just let me know what container app environment resonates in the Kubernetes config space essentially. Thank you very much.